Hi, friends. We are officially on the last chapter of Charlotte's Web, and it is going to be called A Warm Wind. So, after that, we will be done with this book. So, we're going to read this last chapter, and then I have another little read aloud for you to enjoy as our last one together for the school year. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. It was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth he held a sack of spider eggs. Remember, those are Charlotte's babies. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congrats, congrats, congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen, where visitors could come and examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old webs still hung in the doorway. Every day, Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come in his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor, where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and the birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them until they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came in at night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered the house and the barns and the fields and the woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed in the drifts of the yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and laid onto the frozen pond in the pasture. Coasting is the most fun thing there is, said Avery. The most fun there is, retorted Fern, is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are in the top car and Henry makes the car swing and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles. Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel? Said Avery in disgust. The fair was weeks and weeks ago. I can think about it all the time if I want, said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed warm in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way the boys hang around a store, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips and kept them cheerful. Many, many, many thanks, they always said when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home had been the pig trough, and it was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with the bits of dirty newspaper and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbur kept the promise he had made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then, when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than you can ever imagine. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. You would live longer, said the old sheep, if you ate less. Who wants to live forever, sneered the rat. I'm naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast. He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack, as though he were guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack, next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so close that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was more important than as this small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited at the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you are waiting for something to happen or to hatch. The winter ended at last. I heard the frogs today, said the old sheep. Listen, you can hear them now. Wilbur stood and cocked his ears. From the pond, in shrill chorus, came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. Springtime, said the old sheep thoughtfully. Another spring. As she walked away, Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. The snows melted and ran away. The streams and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened. The mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed whiter and a warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than the grain of sand, and no bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray with black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tanned. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders, then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded and he began to squeal. Then he raced in circles, kicking manure in the air. Then he turned a backflip. Then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I'm an old friend of your mother's," said Wilbur. "I'm so glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The little spiders waved their feelings at him. Wilbur could see by the way they acted that they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Anything you need?" The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights they crawled here and there, up and down, around and about, waving at Wilbur, trailing like tiny drag lines behind them and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count, but he knew he had great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon it was as long as a BB shot. They made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened the door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of the damp earth, of the spruce woods, and of the sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft. One spider climbed on top of the fence. Then it did something that came to great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon. As Wilbur watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" But the spider was already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled on top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and sailed away. Then another, then another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. "Come back, children!" "Goodbye," they called. "Goodbye, goodbye." At last, one little spider took enough time to stop and talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. "We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for settling forth. We are astronauts, and we are going out into the world to make our webs for ourselves." "But where?" asked Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us, high, low, near, far, east, west, north, south. We take to the breeze, we go as we please." "Are all of you going?" asked Wilbur. "You can't all go. I would be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure." The air was now full of so many balloonists that the barn cellar looked as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozens were rising, circling, drifting through the door, sailing off in the gentle wind. Cries of goodbye came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch any more. In sorrow, he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was late afternoon. He looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air. The balloonists were gone. Then he walked drearily to the doorway, where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there thinking of her when he heard a small voice. "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another voice. "So am I," said a third voice. 3 of us are staying. We like this place and we like you. Wilbur looked up. At the top of the doorway, 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. Can I take this to mean, said Wilbur, that you are going to definitely decide to live here in this barn cellar and then I'm going to have 3 friends? You can indeed, said the spiders. What are your names, please? Asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. I'll tell you my name, replied the first little spider, if you tell me why you're trembling. I'm trembling with joy, said Wilbur. Then my name is Joy, said the first spider. What's my mother's middle initial? Asked the second spider. A, said Wilbur. Then my name is Arena, said the spider. How about me? Asked the third spider. Will you just pick out a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too silly? Wilbur thought hard. Nellie? He suggested. Fine, I like that very much, said the third spider. You may call me Nellie, she said daintily, fastening out her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this important occasion. Joy, Arena, Nellie, he began, welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hollow doorway from which to string your webs. I think it's only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother, and I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever. And I pledge mine, said Joy. I do too, said Arena. And so do I, said Nellie, who had managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on, and the months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and was careful to avoid childish things like sitting on a milk stool near a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, lived in the doorway. Each spring there were new little spiders hatching all over the place. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot this year of triumph and miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good, night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur. This warm, delicious cellar, with this gracious geese, the changing seasons, the heat of the sun, the passage of the swallows, the nearness of the rats, the sameness of the sheep, the love of the spiders, the smell of the manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte, although he loved her children and great-grandchildren dearly. None of the spiders ever took quite her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It's not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and who is a good writer. Charlotte was both. The end. Yay! I'm so glad we finished this book. And I love that all of Charlotte's little grandchildren and great-grandchildren still continue to be friends with Wilbur. That was a very happy ending to that story. The next book that we're going to read is called The Night Before Summer Vacation, because before you all know it, you all are going to be on summer break. This book reminds me a lot of The Night Before Christmas. So if you've ever read that book, this kind of has a rhyme and a little poem feeling very similar to that book, but this one's all about summer vacation. It's very fun. 'Twas the night before leaving on summer vacation. My family was bursting with anticipation. Dad made a checklist, which he checked as he went. The bug spray, the backpacks, the umbrella, and tent. Mom grabbed the graham crackers and stuff for the s'mores. We carried out helmets, the canoe, and the oars. Remember my raft, my snorkel and bike, plus Pete's doggy bowls and Jimmy's new trike. Down from the attic, our suitcases came. Mom whistled and shouted as if reffing a game. In bathing suits, and flip-flops, and sunblock and hats, and flashlight and lounge chairs and wiffle ball bats. To the top of the pile, to the top of the heap. Now pack away, 5 layers deep. We stuffed and we filled every inch of the shell. Like a water balloon, it started to swell. Done with our packing, we ate dinner at last. Then we got out the scrapbooks of vacations past. There were photos of us at the Museum of Toasters, and my father and I riding fast roller coasters. Here's Jimmy on Babe and me with Paul Bunyan, and there's Mommy beside the world's largest onion. We laughed about trips we'd taken before. Our week at the beach did nothing but pour. It was so cold that we all wore all our fleeces, but we finished a puzzle with 2,000 pieces. At last it was time to climb into our beds, where visions of marshmallows danced in our heads. In the morning, Dad shouted, "Get up, rise and shine. It's 3:45. Let's leave here on time." Then a few moments later, there aroused such a clatter, we ran to the window to see what was the matter, when what to our wondering eyes should appear but Dad, the camper, in a long trail of gear. He chuckled and said, "Let's hit the road before our camper decides to explode." We all squeezed in and drove down our street. I suddenly cried out, "Yikes, we forgot Pete!" Dad made a U-turn and Pete jumped inside. Now we were ready for the 10-hour ride. I heard Jimmy ask as we drove out of sight, "Mommy, are we there yet?" She said, "With luck, by tonight." The end. So I thought that was a great little book, kind of about summer vacation, since you all are going to be heading into your summer vacation very soon. I hope you'll get to go and do some fun things and go some fun places. I know that the virus has kind of held that back from a lot of people, so I hope by summertime we'll get to do more things and see more people and go more fun places, because I know all of us really want that. But I love this book because it gives me a little hope about summer vacation, hoping that it's going to be very fun. So I hope you all enjoyed your last chapter of Charlotte's Web and your summer vacation read aloud. And happy end of the school year. I love you all. Thanks for tuning in and listening to my read alouds.